In the late hours of August 17th, an officer on patrol spotted a young college girl stumbling in the middle of the road, totally unaware that a massive truck was barreling toward her. With danger closing in and common sense taking the night off, the cop flipped on her emergency lights, stopping traffic and preventing a near tragedy.
Okay, because the problem is, okay, I saw you walking from campus this way. You are nowhere near the cottages, okay? You are intoxicated. You're walking around in public. Your skirt is on backwards, okay? Look at your skirt. It's on backwards.
Oh, maybe it's twisted.
You don't have a phone. You don't have a wallet. You don't know where you're going. Right? It's a little concerning for me because I don't really want to let you just start walking. Right? And then all of a sudden you end up at the highway and then you're even further from the cottages.
Mm-hmm.
If I took you back to the cottages, would you be able to tell me where she lives?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay. You see how that's kind of a problem?
Yeah.
Right here is where the officer's concern shifts from casual assistance to legal responsibility. Let's break this down. The young woman admits she probably wouldn't be able to identify the apartment if driven back to the cottages. That's not just inconvenient, that's critical. Under public intoxication statutes, especially in Texas, the key factor isn't just being drunk. It's whether someone is intoxicated to the degree they may endanger themselves or others. And walking aimlessly, without a phone, in an unfamiliar city, unable to identify a destination, that's ticking every box. But here's the twist. She doesn't see a problem. And that disconnect between perceived independence and actual vulnerability is exactly what escalates situations like this. Let me ask you, if you were the officer, would you let her try to figure it out? Or is that too big a gamble?
Okay. Is there anybody's phone number, like, mom's phone number, that we could get Sydney's phone number from?
No.
No? You don't have mom's phone number?
I will be able to walk there.
I'm telling you.
I mean, you could, watch me walk there, but...
Okay, but, so then my other concern is you just told me that if I drove you to the cottages, you wouldn't be able to tell me what area she lived in or what apartment she lived in.
I didn't say that.
You just said that.
I never said that if you drove me to the cottages, I would be able to tell you what apartment she lived in.
I said, if I drive you to the cottages, would you be able to tell me what apartment she's lived in? You said no.
Yeah, but I never asked you to drive me to the cottages.
Okay, but if I let you walk there, what's going to change? You know what I mean?
I don't know, you could have just supervised me, maybe.
Okay, but then when you get there and I'm supervising you, how do we know what apartment she lives in? You can't.
I know the walkway. I don't know the numbers. I don't know
Do you know where in the complex it is?
Mm-mm.
Okay, do you see how that's a problem?
Yeah.
Okay, so even if I supervise you, you don't even know what apartment you're going to. Even if you make it to the cottages, which again is a very significant walk that way, you don't even know when you get there what apartment you're going to. Do you see my problem? No. Okay.
I don't see your problem.
The problem is that you're in public, you're intoxicated, you don't know where you're going, you don't know where you are, you don't have a phone, you don't know your sister's number to call sister and come pick you up. How old are you?
18.
18. So, we're now wandering around a city that we're not from, intoxicated, with no way to call somebody for help. Sister doesn't know where you are, right? You don't have a wallet. Do you know where you put your wallet and your phone?
In her apartment.
Okay, so then how did you were you at Northgate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then who took you to Northgate?
We Ubered.
Okay. Where is...
At the apartment.
Did she go with you to Northgate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you left her house to go to Northgate. With who? Did you go to Northgate?
My friends.
Okay, where are they at?
I don't know.
You have no idea. Okay. Do you see my issue here?
This is the emotional pivot point. The officer is laying out the facts like bullet points in a safety report. 18 years old. Not from the city. Intoxicated. No phone. No gwolit. No idea where friends are. No emergency contact memorized. From a liability standpoint, this is a nightmare scenario. If she walks away and something happens, that officer's decision gets scrutinized frame by frame. But notice something else. She genuinely doesn't feel unsafe. That's the psychological layer here. Alcohol impairs judgment, but it also boosts confidence. So while the officer sees escalating risk, she sees inconvenience. It's almost like they're in two different realities. What do you think? Is this protective policing, or does it feel like overreach?
I don't. I actually don't.
Okay. You're an 18-year-old
Yeah.
in a city you don't know. You're in public.
I do. I just don't know the way to her apartment, though.
Okay. So, but how are you going to get there? You're just going to walk aimlessly from College Station until you find it?
I was just going to walk right wherever that curve is going to go up. And then I was just going to take a right. And I was just going to...
Okay. But then what is that way?
Her apartment.
It's not. I'm telling you that it's not. Like, I'm telling you that the cottages is like way, way that way.
Which way?
It's that way. And you would have to cross over her religious campus. So you'd have to go all the way down this road, cross over a busy highway, and then you end up at the cottages.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Do you understand why I'm concerned for your safety?
So
No, I'm not giving you...
Just press the button.
No, I'm not giving you directions.
Okay, this is huge. The officer just revealed something critical. She crossed on a green light, outside a crosswalk, and a large truck nearly hit her. That single detail completely strengthens the legal basis for arrest. Because now we're not speculating about danger, we have an actual near-miss incident. This transforms the situation from potentially unsafe to demonstrably endangered. Courts often look at objective facts. And this is objective. A vehicle almost hit her. She didn't notice. That's powerful evidence of impairment affecting safety. So here's the million-dollar question. If the officer had simply given directions and driven away, and that truck had struck her, who carries the blame?
What I'm also concerned about is that you crossed the roadway on a green light, and had I not put my lights on, a very large dually truck would have probably hit you. And you had no idea that it was coming at you or that it was a no crosswalk, and you just had no idea.
Yeah.
You understand my dilemma?
Yeah, I got it. I understand.
Alright, do me a favor. Turn in. Put your hands on your back. Oh. You're being placed under arrest for public intoxication, okay? Alright, face the car for me. You have anything in your pockets at all? No? Okay. Oh, look at that. Your ID. Oh my gosh.
And just when you think it can't get worse, boom. The fake ID. Now we've crossed from public intoxication into potential additional charges. Notice her reaction. I don't know. Fake. That hesitation speaks volumes. It's almost resigned. Legally, possession of a fake ID, even without proof she used it to buy alcohol, can carry consequences. And while she denies buying alcohol herself, the presence of that ID undercuts credibility. In courtroom terms, that's damaging, because now the narrative shifts from lost and confused to possibly complicit. Do you think that fake ID changes how this situation feels? Or was she already in too deep at that point?
Is this the real one or the fake one?
I don't know the date.
Okay, how'd you get alcohol?
I didn't get alcohol, dude.
Okay. Sign in. Okay, just like that. And then, there you go. Slide this way. I'm just going to hold your arm and then just kind of fall forward.
Yeah.
There you go.
Can you pull my skirt down a little bit?
Better?
Yeah.
We're gonna go to this door with the window on it. So we'll scoot the males around because you can't talk to males, but we'll scoot them around so that way you're not sitting next to one. Okay?
I can just sit on the edge.
Yeah, that's what I'll probably do.
All right.
But you didn't see.
Go. Do me a favor and go sit over there. I'll have him move. You're good. Walk forward.
So she
Hey
didn't.
man, will you sit right here for me? Here, I'm gonna switch him. You sit where he's sitting, and he's gonna sit right here. Perfect. She's just yeah. You guys got that phone really quick, okay? And then face that way. I'm just gonna switch the cups out on you, okay? Once they call you, we'll get you out of handcuffs. I just have to give you in handcuffs.
Here's something important. Procedural restraint. The officer mentions she has to transport her in handcuffs, but plans to remove them once processing allows. That tells us this isn't about punishment. It's protocol. Standard arrest procedure requires restraints for transport. It's about officer safety and detainee safety, not optics. Also notice the effort to seat her away from male detainees. That's awareness. That's policy consideration. Despite the tension earlier, this portion shows measured handling. Sometimes in viral clips, we only focus on the dramatic moment of arrest, but the details after matter too. They show intent. They show professionalism. And in court, that matters a lot.